So I know I'm gonna get a lot of shit for this, but this is good. I want to have a dialogue. I want to have a conversation because at the end of the day, I do think that Yeezus is gonna turn out to be one of the most important and impactful rap records this decade. But where I'll disagree with people is the different reasons as to why it is so important and addressing the whole belief that this album is quote unquote boundary pushing. I'm not gonna be speaking too much on my likeness of the album. I will speak on it a little bit because it does add to my overall frustration of this record. But I'm more focusing on the disagreement I have with a lot of the general public on this album being boundary pushing and experimental and pushing the envelope of experimental hip hop. And I don't think anyone, or at least most people, are saying that when they hear Yeezus, they're listening to a mirror image of Death Grip's music, and not just Death Grip's. Death Grip's going to come up a lot just because it is the most popular and most high quality of all of these different acts. But that's not the case. The case is merely that there's a clear influence in how this album was approached that can easily be compared to Death Grip's albums like No Love Deep Web and The Money Store. And again, Death Grips aren't the first act to do this kind of music and do this kind of approach. Acts like Clipping, Blackie, and Dialect have all made music that I can hear elements of in Yeezus that is quote unquote being portrayed as being boundary pushing. So before I even get into the actual music, let's talk about the influence. Kanye here was making an attempt at making an experimental / industrial album. And there's a culture behind the subgenre just like every other genre. The culture behind rap music is hip hop. The culture behind punk music is literally doing everything that you're not supposed to be doing and just going against the grain. The fact that the Sex Pistols, when they came out with God Save the Queen, it was the #1 record in England, but it was so controversial and it was so explicit advisory content filled that when you looked at the charts in 1976, it was just a blank line. There was no God Save the Queen's title because that is the epitome of punk music right there. And when it comes to industrial and experimental music, the culture is that you're trying to take all these sounds, you're trying to take all of these noises that usually wouldn't work together, and you're somehow going to put them together to make it accessible to at least some people and make it sound good to at least some people. And then there you have experimental music. You're pushing the boundary, you're doing something new. And I feel like none of that was being done with Yeezus. So before I'm even talking about the music itself, I'm already drawing similarities with all the acts that I previously mentioned and Yeezus right here. And again, I don't think it's a problem at all that Kanye was influenced by these guys. If I heard before Yeezus dropped that Kanye was being influenced by Death Grips, I'm like, fuck yes. Death Grips are one of my favorite groups, and Kanye, I'm a huge Kanye West fan, and I think he is talented enough to pull this off. But where the frustration where this album starts is the fact that Yeezus isn't good. It was a bad attempt at trying to make an experimental album. The way I Am a God is structured with the quick resetting bass line truly reminds me of something that was constantly repeated throughout Death Grip's discography. In this track and in other tracks as well, Kanye mimics something that was in many of the Money Store tracks. Like right around the 1 minute runtime, Kanye has these sample vocals that are just constantly repeating, which is just something that was all over the Money Store album. This same kind of thing is repeated in other tracks like I'm In It. The spaced out and staticky synths in tracks like On Side and Send It Up can also be attributed to some of the music that has already been mentioned. And again, I can look at this entire album in a more general sense and just say that the distorted bass, the screaming, the unnecessary noises, and again, the approach and the culture behind this album just sounds like so many things that I've heard before, and it's frustrating to add this overall facade that this is the album that is pushing the boundary and this is the album that is bringing something new to hip-hop, when in reality, all that I'm seeing here that is being labeled as groundbreaking is just shit that I've heard before, just at a way lower level and quality. So my dislikeness towards this album and the overall facade, again, that I mentioned that this album is groundbreaking, isn't the only part to me that is frustrating. It's also the fact that this album is very gimmicky to me. At this point in Kanye's career, in 2013 when this album came out, Kanye at this point had already mastered the soulful sound with his first 2 albums. He then moved on to Graduation, where he mastered the futuristic sound and it sounded very fucking well. He then moved on to his most experimental and actually groundbreaking album with 808s and Heartbreak, experimenting with auto-tune and the 808 drums, which was very innovative. And then he moved on to the My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which incorporated a lot of people's vocals as instrumentals, and I feel like that's what influenced the Young Thugs and the Travis Scotts, which when it comes to their own albums, they feel like their own voices and presences are just merely instrumentals that are added to the overall presentation of their albums. So now after 2010, it feels like Kanye conquered pretty much everything and did everything that a rapper and an artist could possibly dream of doing and conquering within one music career. And I feel like Kanye was kind of running out of ideas, like what else can I do to stand out? What else can I do to just reinvent myself with every release? And I feel like he just hopped on a trend. The whole industrial hip-hop, experimental hip-hop trend was very much on the rise around 2013, around 2012, around even 2011. Ever since Death Grips came out, it just seems like it was just risen to a whole new level in popularity. And I feel like Kanye with this release for the first time wasn't innovative and wasn't trying to do anything new. This was the first album where it felt like Kanye was was forced to do something just because he wanted to keep this overall persona ongoing of being so different and just, again, reinventing himself with every new album. And this is like the first time where it just seems like he wasn't comfortable with the production, and that's why I think, in my opinion, it didn't sound that good. Yeezus just sounds to me like Kanye heard about Death Grips and Blackie and Clipping and all these other acts and was like, I'm gonna be the first dude to bring this into the mainstream, and I'm gonna be looked upon it as a genius, and this is gonna be the first time a lot of people are introduced to this new sound. And since this is the first time they're gonna be hearing all these different weird synths and distorted bass and all this screaming and unnecessary noises, they're gonna think I created something new, and I'm gonna be labeled as a genius, and this is gonna go down as a classic. And look, 5-6 years later, that's exactly what people are thinking, and I think it fucking worked. Like, this gimmick fucking worked, in my opinion. The second reason why I think this album is gimmicky as fuck is that this album easily marked the biggest lyrical drop off from one album to another in Kanye's entire career. I've constantly been revisiting this album, and I still can't find one good line or one even decent line. Like when Kanye made 808s and Heartbreak, I understand the album wasn't supposed to be a lyrical album, and I wasn't expecting Kanye to be just straight up spitting like the way he was in My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. That is fine, but at least give me an interesting concept. At least give me some interesting subject matter. Like, the lines here and the subject matter and the concept just aren't put together well. They don't add to anything. There isn't an ongoing story. So not only am I not getting any bars at all, I'm also not getting anything with the subject matter concept. Just anything based off the lyrics, it's just straight up subpar and mediocre level. And the last reason why I think this album is so fucking gimmicky is the fact that after Yeezus, Kanye hasn't returned to any of the sounds he incorporated here at all. When he made 808s and Heartbreaks, and I keep bringing up 808s because these are the two albums that Kanye fans believe to be the most experimental. When he made 808s and Heartbreak, to this day, he is still using those sounds. He is still experimenting with his autotune. He is still experimenting with those 808 drums. And I feel like Yeezus has not been returned to because Kanye isn't comfortable with that sound, and he feels like he can't really return back to it because that is the only time in his career when he wasn't comfortable and he wasn't at the top of his game when it came to beats. But all the other sounds that he's done before, he's felt comfortable. But he needed to shit this album out because he wanted to be continually be praised as a genius, even though the beats here don't sound like they're in Kanye's arsenal at all. And when it comes to influence with other artists, there doesn't need to be an overbearing resemblance between the two. When it comes to Andre 3000 and Big Boy with Outkast, they mentioned that throughout the beginning of their career, so let's say Southern Playalistic Cadillac Funkin' Music and AT Aliens, they were being influenced by A Tribe Called Quest, and we can pretty much all agree that none of those albums are jazzy albums that we can compare to Tribe Called Quest, but it was the approach within the music that influenced Andre 3000 and Big Boy to make great records. Now, the only difference here is that the influence is way more obvious, and also Yeezus isn't a good album, and all the other acts that I've mentioned have done what Kanye tried to do here and make an experimental album, but the difference is that they actually succeed. I don't have a personal hatred towards what Kanye made here with Yeezus. I just have such a problem with the fact that people think this album is so boundary pushing. I have such a problem with all this credit that this album is given. And it's not just because of the fact that I don't like this album. It is mostly due to the fact that all this credit should be given to all the acts that have been constantly mentioned throughout this video. It is the fact that indie music is constantly being ignored, and now even when they're able to create a sound and master it, all that a mainstream artist has to do is take that sound, commercialize the fuck out of it, and they're gonna get all the credit that should be given to all of these indie acts that actually made the sound. If you took The Money Store and you took No Love Deep Web and you combined them together and then you put them through this machine that just commercializes every sound, Yeezus is exactly what you would get. And again, I don't have a problem with that. My problem is the fact that the credit is being given to Yeezus when Kanye should not be looked upon as a genius for any of what was created in this album. And even for the people that think this album popularized his sound, and just for him popularizing the sound alone, he should be given the credit to because he made this popular. How is that alone, just popularizing the sound, boundary pushing, or should be given credit to, or should be looked upon as a classic album? Basically, what people are saying is that any rapper or any artist that has a very large fan base, they can just constantly search for the different subgenres within hip-hop that aren't popular, find that sound, commercialize it, put it out to the whole world, and they're going to be looked upon as a genius. And even if people find the other artists, they're going to say, well, I popularized this sound, so I should be given credit to. Like, nah, that is such fucking bullshit. Like, no, like, it's the innovators and the pioneers that should be given the credit to. And we especially shouldn't be giving credit to Yeezus when Yeezus itself just isn't that good. If you think Yeezus is good, that's fine, but I just personally think it's just not a well put together album at all. There were aspects of this album that I liked. There are a few songs I did like. Bound 2. I did like some more of the subtle moments here, but again, the subtle moments are the ones that are being constantly mentioned. It's more abrasive sounds and the more, again, quote unquote boundary pushing sounds, which is fucking bullshit, that are being given credit to and are being highlighted and emphasized, and I don't like those sounds at all. I personally think this album is like a 5 out of 10. There are a few good moments, but really most of the time I'm struggling to get through a full listen here. And again, I constantly feel like, why am I listening to this when I can just listen to people that made this exact sound just way fucking better? So yeah, that's all I gotta say on that. You let me know what your opinion on Yeezus is, and give me your opinions on indie music, I guess. And I will be with y'all very soon. Please like, please subscribe, and peace.